Hello, I'm Esther Githu-Ewart. It's Monday, October 3rd. This is Africa 54.
A new military leader seizes power in Burkina Faso as former President Paul-Henri-Damiba resigns and flees the country after a coup. Somalia says a co-founder of Islamist terrorist group Al-Shabab had been killed in a joint operation with U.S. Africa Command. And U.S. President Joe Biden to visit Puerto Rico and Florida to survey the devastation caused by Hurricane Ian.
Burkina Faso has a new military leader after President Paul-Henri-Damiba resigned following a coup on Friday. Paul Ndiho has the details.
Burkina Faso's self-proclaimed leader is Ibrahim Traoré. He agreed to 7 stipulations, including guaranteeing Henri Damiba's safety and the security of the soldiers who backed him. The former leader, Paul-Henri-Damiba, conditionally resigned on Sunday following a coup that ousted him on Friday. It followed a mediation between the former junta chief and Traoré by religious and community leaders. The official announcement of Traoré as the transitional president came on Sunday. Hundreds of people came out into the streets to show their support, some even waving Russian flags. Regional diplomatic sources said Damiba, who seized power in a January coup, fled to Togo on Sunday following violent protests and clashes as Traoré's faction moved to topple the government. Dozens of Traoré's supporters gathered at the French embassy Sunday in Ouagadougou in protests. France was Burkina Faso's former colonizer. Security forces fired tear gas inside the compound to disperse the angry protesters after they set fire barriers outside and lobbed rocks at the structure, some trying to scale the fence.
Government.
That is why it was necessary for us, as young Burkinabés, to come out and support these young people, because we're fighting for the same vision of autonomy of our country, of freedom, so that our brothers and sisters can live in an environment of peace, security and prosperity.
Traoré's supporters say the country is in a crisis. Several protesters spoke out against the former regime.
He's a young man who took it. He's a young man who's the same age as Captain Thomas Sankara, our former president. And today, we're happy because we have the impression that he's going to do better than the others.
They are a determined people. They are a united people who have decided to take their destiny into their own hands. Since the day before yesterday, this is what has mobilized the young, the old, the women, the children to go out to say no to the Damiba regime.
Friday's event sparked a wave of international reaction and criticism, including from the United States, the African Union, the European Union, and the Economic Community for West African States. ECOWAS has grappled with several coups in recent years. The new self-proclaimed Burkina leader says he's willing to go to other partners, ready to help in the fight against terrorism. Russia, whose influence is growing across French-speaking Africa, including in Mali, the Central African Republic, may possibly among the unmentioned partners in question. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
Joining us now from Ouagadougou with more information is reporter Henry Wilkins. Hello, Henry. Tell us what's happening on the ground.
Yes, so it's a lot calmer today compared to the scenes over the weekend. Although on Friday night the junta took to the national television station to announce their coup. The coup didn't really feel complete until really yesterday evening. On Saturday, there were troops out on the streets, apparently expecting a retaliation from the now ousted President Damiba. There were helicopters circling overhead, which the new junta leader Traore actually said weren't under his control, but were under the control of Damiba. So really, throughout the weekend, there was this sense that there could be infighting between the two factions within the army. It's really only on Sunday afternoon that we heard that the former President Damiba had resigned. He's now said to be in Togo. Also on Sunday, we saw attacks on the French embassy as well, by protesters who seem to be supporting the coup. Lots of people there believe that the former President Damiba was being held either in the French embassy or inside a French special forces base on the outskirts of the city. Even yesterday evening, just before dark, I took a quick ride around the city, and there were still protesters out on the streets. But today it's different. Today it's more calm, and it seems like Traore does have relative control of the country. So,
ousted military leader Sandaogo took a military helicopter to Togo. Had he already planned his exit, or was he aided by those who ousted him?
It's likely that he was aided by those who ousted them. One of the conditions of his resignation, as far as we were told, was that he would enjoy the protection of the new military junta, as would the soldiers who had supported him. So it is likely that he was assisted in leaving the country. Sure.
You mentioned the French embassy in Ouagadougou. Is it functioning, since you say that there were protesters outside of the embassy?
Yeah, we don't know. The French embassy's comms team have been very quiet over the weekend, perhaps understandably so. I think they do not want to be seen to be getting involved in this coup. We don't know whether staff have returned to work yet. Certainly, there was some damage to the walls and the exterior of the embassy over the weekend. So I would imagine that probably many of the embassy workers are working from home.
Henry, thanks. Henry Wilkins reporting live from Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. Now for analysis on the coup in Burkina Faso, I'm joined live from here in Washington by Daniel Eisengar, a research fellow at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies. Daniel, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, this is the second coup in just 9 months in Burkina Faso. What does this say about the stability, the political stability of Burkina Faso?
Yes, I think it says quite a lot. In fact, I think it speaks to the inherent instability of military governments. Once you have a coup that's taken hold, the justification and rationalization for other extra-legal actions has already been made. So it shouldn't be surprising that we see others attempt to seize power. The impacts of internal stability and military professionalism really can't be understated when talking about military coups. And I think particularly in this case, we see that there were very many moments where the situation on the ground was very tense. The military was quite divided. You had the potential for conflict to break out between different groups within the military, either in support of the now ousted junta leader Damiba or in support of current junta leader Traore. But this is consistent with what we see across the continent with authoritarian leading countries. Conflict, instability are baked into that form of governance.
Daniel, Captain Ibrahim Traore is promising to defeat the jihadists. First of all, who is Captain Traore, and can he really defeat these jihadists?
Well, we're still learning a little bit about Captain Traore, but we know that he is, we believe he's 33 or 34, and so As one of the protesters, I think, mentioned, he's about the same age as Captain Thomas Sankara when he took power in the 80s, and who has a long legacy in Burkina Faso. We know that Captain Traoré studied at the University of Ouagadougou, that he joined the army in 2010, that he was promoted to the rank of captain in 2020. There's some confusion around where he comes from in the military, whether he has an association with the special forces. There's a counterterrorist unit that's sometimes called the Cobra unit, and some outlets have reported that he's been linked to the Cobra unit, but others are saying that he may have been stationed in Kaya as part of an artillery unit there. And Kaya being, I think, the 5th largest town in Burkina Faso, and right on the front with the militant Islamist insurgents in northern Burkina Faso. Whether he'll be able to do anything different than his predecessor, Paul-Henri-Damiba, is a fair question. I think that unfortunately at the moment, the real victory here is for the militant Islamist groups operating in the country. I mean, this serves as a huge distraction of resources, political will, personnel. It really is a destabilizing event, and all of that plays into the hands of the militant insurgents that have been wreaking havoc across large swaths of Burkina Faso now for several years.
You know, Daniel, following the coup, crowds of people were seen waving Russian flags in Ouagadougou, in other parts of Burkina Faso. What do you make of that?
Well, we know that Russia has been the leading purveyor of disinformation campaigns in Africa, with at least 16 known disinformation campaigns on the continent. And these campaigns are targeting public opinion. They're basically influence campaigns. They're trying to sway public opinion, stoke anti-French sentiment, and build support for a so-called Russian model to counterterrorism. But the reality is that even in just neighboring Mali, Russian interventions have gone disastrously. We've seen civilian fatalities in Mali increase by 150% in 2022 since this mercenary group that's linked to the Russian state, Wagner, was deployed to Mali. This is consistent across the board. In Central African Republic, we've seen that large parts of the country have essentially been annexed to the Wagner mercenaries. That the Central African Republic no longer controls that territory and is at sort of the disposition of Wagner mercenaries. In Central Mali, the security situation has really deteriorated, and that's had a huge impact on northern Burkina Faso as well, which borders Central Mali. And so it's really kind of head-scratching that folks would see the Russians as a better model or a better option for combating violent extremists. I think rather Russia deploying Wagner to Africa is really just an effort by Moscow to try and displace France, and the relentless Russian disinformation messaging is a big part of why we see these kinds of public displays for that model.
We've also seen reactions coming out of the African Union, the ECOWAS, the West African bloc there, and also the United Nations condemning this coup. But are these condemnations enough? Should they be followed by action?
I think they really need to be. The African Union did come out and they put out a condemnation saying that this is a resurgence of unconstitutional ousters, that's very, very worrying. The UN, as well as you said, has condemned the action. I think that probably the most disappointing statement so far, however, has come out of ECOWAS. Right. It's really more of a non-statement on behalf of the current chairperson at ECOWAS, President Paul. He welcomed the peaceful conclusion of events and took note of Damiba's resignation, but he really didn't go far enough. And I think that if anyone should recognize the slippery slope in the region that these repeated coups create, it should be ECOWAS. Right, they need to take a strong position and take a break from allowing this unconstitutional.
Right, Daniel, we're going to have to wrap it there. Thank you so much. Daniel Eisenga is a research fellow at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies. For more details on the story, please visit voaafrica.com. At least 20 people are dead and over 35 were wounded after witnesses say heavy 35 people were wounded after witnesses say heavy explosions rocked the central Somali town of Beledweyne on Monday. Residents told VOA that 2 car bombs targeted Lamagali, the local government headquarters in the Eastern District. Lamagali is where the offices of the deputy leader of Al-Shabab state, the governor of Hiran region, and other local government officials are located. The terrorist group Al-Shabab is claiming responsibility for the attack. The Somali government says it has killed Abdullahi Nadir, who was in line to replace Al-Shabab leader. Somalia's information ministry says Nadir was killed in an operation with its international partners. David Doyle has more.
One of the co-founders of militant group Al-Shabab has been killed, Somalia's government announced late on Sunday. In a statement, the country's information ministry said the operation against Abdullahi Nadir was carried out on Saturday with international partners. Nadir, the ministry said, was Al-Shabab's chief prosecutor and in line to replace the group's leader, Ahmed Diriye, who is sick. His death is a thorn removed from the Somali nation, the statement read. Al-Shabab insurgents have killed tens of thousands of people since 2006. The Al-Qaeda-linked group is seeking to overthrow Somalia's Western-backed government and impose its strict interpretation of Islamic law. Somalia's President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, elected in May, has promised to take the fight to the militants.
We are actively fighting the terrorist group.
That's after 3 years in which his predecessor, consumed by political infighting, took little action. Somali security forces have touted gains made in recent weeks while fighting alongside local self-defense groups. But Al-Shabab has continued its deadly raids, including 2 on Friday that killed at least 16 people. Somalia's military is supported by US troops and drones and an African Union peacekeeping mission. It was not immediately clear which international partners participated in the operation against Nadir.
David Doyle of Reuters filed that report. And for more perspective on the hunt for Al-Shabab terrorists in Somalia, I'm joined by Harun Maruf, a VOA senior editor. Harun, welcome back to Africa 54. So first of all, Abdullahi Nadir was on the run for years. What kind of a threat did he pose to the Somali people?
Well, he was one of the co-founders of Al-Shabab. He was a key figure. He was involved in the creation of the Al-Shabab media department, which is very savvy, which participates in attracting young men to the group. He was also involved in the Da'wah department, that is the preaching Al-Shabab version of jihad in Somalia. So he was a key figure, and he was part of Al-Shabab. And the United States designated Al-Shabab in 2008 as a terrorist organization. And the United States believes that Al-Shabab is a serious threat, not only to the interests of the United States, but to Somalis and Somalia and the region as well, and beyond Somalia. So that's why the United States has been designating and targeting key individuals within Al-Shabab. As you know, in September 2014, the former leader of Al-Shabab was killed in a U.S. drone strike. So the United States has been targeting key figures within the group in order to minimize their threat and their influence within Al-Shabaab.
So we're learning today about the 3 explosions in Beledweyne. Does this have to do with retaliation because Nadir was killed, or what more do you know about these explosions?
I am not sure it's related to retaliation for Nadir's killing. It's possible, but Al-Shabaab usually takes a long time in organizing this kind of highly planned explosive attacks against the very populated areas. That would have gone, a lot of work would have gone into that, a lot of preparation, which would require not only days, but also weeks. But it's very reasonable to say that Al-Shabaab was taking revenge for the local community's mobilization in support of the Somali government. That mobilization within the last few weeks has liberated over 40 villages and areas from Al-Shabaab. And Al-Shabaab has been cut off from its influence and also resources within these areas. So Al-Shabaab has directly threatened these areas and the local communities that they're going to take revenge for supporting the government. So this attack was expected for a long time, and this is the hallmark of Al-Shabab attacks. It's a very vindictive organization. They always take revenge in attacks and threats against them.
Harun, as always, thank you for your insight.
Welcome.
Harun Maruf is a VOA senior Somali editor. Many families are already displaced by conflict in Somalia and are being forced to flee again as the country faces its worst drought in 40 years. Over 7 million people are experiencing acute food insecurity that's being blamed on the failure of 4 successive rainy seasons. Experts warn that a 5th rainy season is likely to fail. With an underfunded humanitarian response and surge in global food prices, the United Nations predicts Somalia may face again in coming months. The country has had several recurring dry spells in the last decade.
You will find that some people are accompanied, or they don't have children that are going alone, that do not have parents with them. You can understand the level of situation they are in for not having a family, and unprotected children and families, and mother who is giving birth outside this area who does not have something to eat. I think it is very hard even to understand that situation. I understand that we need or request donors on their support to scale up everything.
In a country where pastoralism and farming sustains over half of the population, the loss of over 3 million livestock from hunger and lack of water is devastating for families. For information on this story, visit voaafrica.com. At least 34 migrants are dead after trying to make the dangerous voyage to reach European soil. There was only one survivor who said all the victims were from sub-Saharan Africa and had been traveling in a small boat for 9 days, according to local media. A Spanish Coast Guard vessel transported the bodies of 4 migrants found in the Atlantic Ocean to its port of Gran Canaria on Monday. The small vessel was spotted on Saturday, 240 kilometers from the Canary Islands, by a merchant ship which rescued the only survivor. Several dozen migrants are still missing. The survivor was taken to Gran Canaria by helicopter for treatment. Environment ministers from some 50 countries are gathering in the Democratic Republic of Congo Monday for a pre-COP27 climate summit. Wealthy nations are likely to come under pressure to raise spending to combat climate change. The talks in Kinshasa are informal but meant to allow various countries and green groups to tackle stock of political positions ahead of COP27, the United Nations climate gathering of world leaders in Egypt next month. In other African news, Chad has adopted resolutions that push back democratic elections by 2 years and allow interim leader Mahamat Idris Deby to stay in power and be eligible to run for president in the eventual vote. Libya's Missing Persons Authority has announced the discovery of 42 bodies buried in a mass grave in the central coastal city of Sirte, a former stronghold of the ousted Islamic State group. And authorities in Ethiopia's rebel-held Tigray region say they have withdrawn forces from occupied parts of a neighboring region to counter a major offensive unfolding to the north. U.S. President Joe Biden is set to visit the devastated areas of the southeastern state of Florida on Wednesday to survey the massive damage caused by Hurricane Ian. The White House has also announced that Biden and First Lady Jill Biden is visiting Puerto Rico on Monday. VOA's Arashar Basadi has more.
Last Wednesday in Florida, Hurricane Ian made landfall as one of the strongest storms ever recorded in the U.S. Roughly 2.5 million people were under evacuation orders. As a Category 4 storm, Ian spun sustained winds north of 240 kilometers per hour. Flooding followed and more than 2 million Florida homes and businesses lost power. Florida's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis said the storm surge at some areas likely rose above 3.5 meters. The next morning, President Joe Biden addressed the headquarters of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA.
This could be the deadliest hurricane in Florida's history. The numbers are still unclear, but we're hearing early reports of what may be substantial loss of life.
Federal and local rescue efforts continue, but the Biden administration says it is simply too soon to count the dead for what was an unpredictable storm path until just hours before landfall.
This is going to be a long road to recovery, and there are a lot of people that are impacted. But we also know that we're still actively in the search and rescue phase, trying to make sure that we are accounting for everybody that was in the storm's path, and that we go through every home to make sure that we don't leave anybody behind.
Florida's Republican legislators, often at public odds with the Biden administration, praise the robust search and rescue operations from federal to local.
The federal response from day one has been very positive, as it's always been in the past, and we're grateful for that. FEMA's the primary responder. The incident command is in the state. The states step up, and then the states tell FEMA, we need this or we need that, and that's the process we're working through right now. But it's an extraordinary mobilization of the Army Corps, the Coast Guard. I mean, virtually every federal asset that's available, not just through FEMA but other agencies.
Lawmakers describe many of the areas hardest hit by Hurricane Ian as total losses beyond salvage. Ian follows Hurricane Fiona, which recently battered the U.S. territory of Puerto Rico. President Biden and the First Lady will visit both areas this week. Arash Erbasadi, VOA News.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.
ISIS and others continue to take advantage of conflict, governance failure, political turmoil, socioeconomic inequalities, and grievances to attract followers and resources, as well as to incite and organize terrorist attacks. ISIS and Al-Qaeda affiliates continue to exploit Africa's long-simmering conflicts to bolster their illicit activities, providing them heightened lethality. ISIS West Africa merits particular focus as the group that has become the largest and one of the most lethal ISIS affiliates outside the core region. It is critical that the international community continues the fight to deny safe haven for Al-Qaeda and its affiliates. The United States continues to provide our African partners critical counterterrorism assistance to disrupt and degrade ISIS and Al-Qaeda affiliates, underscoring that capable law enforcement and broader security service responses are essential to prevent and counter terrorism.